It started like any ordinary afternoon at the shooting range. Men lined up, showing off their skills, laughter echoing with every missed shot or near-perfect aim. Then she walked in, a quiet, middle-aged woman in a plain dress and sneakers, carrying nothing but a small case. No one paid her much attention at first, but when she nervously stepped toward the line, the whispers began. Some smirked. Others chuckled under their breath. A few didn't even try to hide their laughter. What's she doing here? Probably her first time holding a gun. This'll be good. She didn't say much, just nodded politely and listened as one of the instructors explained the basics, though it was clear no one expected her to actually hit anything. When she picked up the pistol, her hands trembled ever so slightly. Her first few shots missed the target completely, and the crowd made sure she heard their judgment. You could feel the air tighten with the weight of ridicule and underestimation. Then something changed. She paused, took a deep breath, and calmly reached into her bag to pull out a black blindfold. A few people laughed again, louder this time. "Is this a joke?" someone called out, but she didn't flinch. She tied the cloth around her eyes, raised the pistol once more, and stood still, completely still, for a long moment. The range fell silent. Then she fired, one shot, then another and another. The room filled with stunned gasps as the bullets landed, one by one, in the center of the target. No one laughed anymore. But what they didn't know, what no one there could have guessed, was who she really was, and the story behind those 10 perfect bullseyes. No one at the range that day had any idea who she really was. To them, she was just a simple woman, quiet, modest, maybe even a little out of place. But behind that calm face and soft voice was a history no one could have imagined. Her name was Maria. She lived alone in a small town not far from the range, worked at a local diner, and spent most of her time caring for her aging father. People in her neighborhood knew her as kind and humble, always offering a helping hand, but never talking much about herself. What they didn't know was that years ago, in another life, she had trained in competitive shooting. Not just casually, she had once been one of the best. But something had happened. A tragedy. One that made her walk away from the sport completely. She put away her trophies, locked up her gear, and tried to disappear into an ordinary life. For nearly a decade, she never touched a gun. Until today. What brought her back to the range? No one knew. Not the instructor who watched in shock, not the group of men who had mocked her minutes before. All they could see now was a woman, blindfolded, hitting bullseye after bullseye like she'd never stopped. The air felt different now, heavier. People leaned in, whispering, trying to figure her out. Was this some kind of trick? Co taught her why hide her skill. Even the range manager, who had been watching quietly from the back, stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. But Maria didn't say a word. She slowly removed her blindfold, placed the gun down gently, and looked at the target one last time. And then she reached for something else in her bag. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph, faded around the edges, like something that had been carried for years. She held it for a moment before handing it to the instructor, who looked down and quietly gasped. It showed a younger Maria, standing beside a tall man in uniform, both holding trophies, smiles wide and proud. That man was her brother, an elite marksman, once known across the state for his unmatched skill. He was the one who had taught her everything. Years ago, they were inseparable, training partners, best friends. But after he passed away in a tragic accident during a hunting trip, Maria had walked away from shooting completely. The pain of losing him was too much. Every gunshot reminded her of what she had lost, so she left that part of her life behind, choosing peace and silence over the echo of the range. But today wasn't just about proving herself, it was about honoring him. It would have been his birthday. That's why she came back. Not to impress anyone, not to make headlines, just to remember him the only way she knew how, through precision, focus, and the bond they once shared. The crowd stood in silence, many now realizing they had misjudged her. There were no more jokes, just respect. The instructor, still holding the photo, quietly nodded. "You never really forget," Maria said softly, more to herself than anyone else. She packed up her things, gave one last look at the target, 10 perfect shots, and walked away, disappearing into the afternoon sun. No celebration, no spotlight, just a quiet tribute from a woman everyone thought was just ordinary. And maybe that's the real story. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones you least expect, and greatness doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives in silence and leaves its mark without a word. All eyes were glued to Maria as she stood there, still and silent, the blindfold now resting in her hand. The room seemed frozen, like even the air was holding its breath. No one knew what to say. She had already done the unthinkable, 10 perfect bullseyes while blindfolded. But it felt like she wasn't finished yet. She wasn't just showing skill. She was telling a story without words, and no one could look away. The instructor stepped forward slowly, clearly shaken but curious. "Who are you?" he asked, more softly than before. Maria didn't answer. Instead, she walked back to her case and began to unzip a side pocket. The clicks of the zipper echoed across the range. Everyone leaned in, wondering what she would pull out next. A few people exchanged nervous glances. Was this woman part of something bigger? A former champion? Military? Secret training? Out of the pocket, she took a small folded cloth, dark blue, with an embroidered patch at the corner. She unfolded it slowly, revealing a badge. A sharp gasp came from the back. One of the older men in the crowd whispered, "That's a sharpshooter's mark, from over 20 years ago." The realization spread like a wave. She wasn't just good, she was once among the best. Still, Maria said nothing, her face calm, but her eyes carried weight, like someone who had lived through something too heavy to explain. Her hands were steady, movements precise. She adjusted the settings on the range herself, increasing the distance to the farthest target, something even the regulars didn't dare to try. Then she tied the blindfold again. People moved closer now, some recording, others just frozen in awe. The silence was louder than any sound. She raised the gun, took her stance, and the room held its breath. As Maria raised the pistol and pointed it toward the farthest target, the tension in the room thickened. Even the usual background noise, the hum of conversation, the occasional cough, had vanished. It was as if time itself had paused, waiting for the shot. Then came the sound. Asterisk click asterisk. A misfire. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She lowered the weapon, calmly, no panic in her face. But her fingers moved fast, checking the magazine, reloading with practiced speed. Still blindfolded, still silent. But something in her posture shifted, tighter, sharper. Not fear, focus. Then the door at the back of the range creaked open. A tall man in a leather jacket stepped in. The room turned slightly, recognizing him. His name was Blake, a former marksman, once a rival to Maria's brother. He hadn't been seen at a range in years. Rumor had it he disappeared after a controversial tournament, one where Maria's brother had beat him by a single point. He stood there, arms crossed, eyes locked on Maria. "I thought you were done with this," he said, his voice calm but heavy. Maria didn't respond. "She's doing this for him," someone whispered. Blake walked closer, boots echoing on the concrete. "You're not just here to shoot targets, are you?" he said, his tone more challenging now. "You're here to prove something." Maria adjusted her grip again. You could feel the energy shift in the room, no longer just curiosity, but a spark of something deeper. A rivalry reborn, a past unsettled. "Go on then," Blake said. "Let's see if you still have it, or if you're just chasing ghosts." Everyone stared, unsure of what would happen next. The gun was loaded, the blindfold still on, the distance nearly impossible. And Maria was about to pull the trigger. Maria took one steady breath. The range was dead silent, every eye locked on her. Blake stood just a few feet away, arms still crossed, watching her like a man waiting for a storm. But Maria didn't flinch. She raised the gun again, blindfold still tied tight, her hands calm like they'd done this 1,000 times before. She fired. One shot, then another, then 8 more, spaced with perfect rhythm. The sound of each shot echoed across the walls like a heartbeat. When the last bullet left the barrel, there was a pause, just a second of stillness that felt like forever. The range manager, hands shaking slightly, stepped toward the target at the far end. It was so far away that even with perfect vision, few dared to aim for it. He took one look, then turned back toward the crowd, mouth slightly open. 10, dead center. Every single one, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Gasps and stunned silence followed, then scattered applause, even a few cheers, but Maria didn't react. She took off the blindfold slowly, and her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Blake. He gave a short nod, grudging respect, but before turning to leave, he muttered, "Still not better than your brother." That's when Maria opened her bag once more and pulled out something small, a badge identical to her brother's, with her own name etched beneath it. He wasn't the only champion, she said softly. And then came the twist. She walked over to the range desk, pulled out a paper tucked deep in her case, and handed it to the manager. A signed form, application for the national shooting competition. Her comeback wasn't just for today. She was stepping back into the spotlight. This time, not in his shadow, but in her own name. The news of Maria's perfect blindfolded bullseyes and her return to competitive shooting spread fast. Within days, local blogs picked up the story, then shooting forums, then news outlets. The headlines called her the silent sharpshooter and the comeback queen. But Maria didn't care about the attention. She wasn't doing this for fame or recognition. She was doing it for something deeper, for healing, for closure, and for herself. The people at the range that day would never forget what they witnessed. It wasn't just about shooting or skill. It was about grace under pressure, quiet strength, and reclaiming lost pieces of yourself. Even Blake, who had once stood as her brother's rival, returned a few days later, not to compete, but to shake Maria's hand. "You earned it," he said simply. Maria continued practicing at the range, but not with loud announcements or big crowds. She preferred the early mornings, before most arrived, when the air was cool and the world was quiet. In those moments, with each shot, she felt closer to her brother and more herself than she had in years. When the national competition finally came, she walked onto the stage, not as someone trying to prove anything, but as someone who already had. She didn't just carry a pistol, she carried every memory, every lesson, and every moment that had shaped her journey. She didn't win first place that day, but that didn't matter, because she had already won something far greater, her peace. And for those who watched her story unfold, one thing became clear: true strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks in quietly, blindfolded, steady in its aim, and reminds the world that it's never too late to rise. And that even the simplest people often carry the most powerful stories.